So the first part of the question is, what are the core elements of what we do? What's important about what we do? What do we want our students to be learning? So I'll go ahead and I'll start with Kirsten.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here. This is really fun and exciting to do. And I just wanted to start, since I'm kind of starting off and I don't know all of the other panelists, but I'm pretty sure we're all in agreement. Thank you for being engaged in this discussion. Taking time and engaging yourself in this is really, really important, I think. So I thought a lot about this question when Sarah sent it, and I think the core elements of what we teach is going to be really different depending on who you teach and who you are and what your teaching philosophy is. I know for me, one of the most important things to me is that every single time I have a rehearsal, that every single person laughs at least once in my rehearsal. That is a core element for me. It's really important to me that that happens. That's going to differ from teacher to teacher. So when I was thinking about this question, I don't know if you have had a few minutes to do this, but I have reread all of the national standards for music and ensembles just to keep myself present in what we do. And they use words like create, imagine, plan and make, evaluate, refine, present, perform, select, analyze, interpret, rehearse, evaluate, respond, and then lastly it says connect. And I think that that's where we all kind of land. I read the other core art standards and I think I can teach this with someone who is by themselves in their house. And then I get to connect. And I think that that's where we all kind of stop and freeze and think to ourselves, how do we make that happen without being in person or whatnot? And I think it's really interesting. A colleague of mine who's at San Diego State University wrote a beautiful document, and he says that he refers to the National Associations of the Schools of Music, and they actually make a distinct difference in their ensemble standards and their solo standards. So that really got me thinking, what's the difference between solo singing and teaching solo singing and ensemble singing and teaching ensemble singing? And this is what I came up with, which is a long-winded way to say, this is my answer to the original question. The core elements of ensemble teaching in my mind are teamwork, self-evaluation in the context of comparison. And what I mean by this is I'm singing a vowel. I hear the person next to me singing a vowel. I compare my vowel to that person's vowel, and I change and adapt based on what I hear in real time. And I think that that is where the trickiest thing is. How many notes and rhythms do our students hear someone else doing correctly next to them and quickly adapt? That's the one thing that really, really cannot be done if the student is alone and not in real time. Confidence and self-esteem, that's something that, again, it's that comparative. I did that well. And I know I did that well because I heard how other people did it. And now I can compare. Or I have a weakness. This weakness is. While some of our students might be able to do that internally, it's very difficult to do that without an ensemble structure. And then just responsiveness in real time to ensemble members and the conductor. I think we can all think about a time when we were conducting. I know I do this a lot, and we're conducting, and we make a shape to tell them to get quieter and quieter and quieter, and how quiet can we get until? And their responsiveness in real time, I think, is something that is a core element of what we teach. So those four things: teamwork, self-evaluation in the context of comparison, confidence and self-esteem, and responsiveness in real time are what I think are the core elements of what we teach. You're muted, Sarah. I love you.
Thank you. I think we can pose that same question now to all of our panelists. I think we'd like to hear that answer from everyone. So we'll just kind of go down the line. So maybe if Amanda would answer next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Hanzlik, and like Sarah said, I teach at E.S. Smith High School in Storrs, Connecticut. It's so good to be here. Thank you so much, Sarah, for the invitation. I think, you know, when I first looked at this question and thought about this, the first thing that I thought of was the word connection being primary for me, and the how to get to connection. You know, the multiple ways, the multiple vehicles to that ultimate goal. The other elements that kept coming up in my mind were also listening and expression, communicating, a sense of holistic musicianship, kind of an overarching you know, set of skills and set of sensibilities, as well as a skill set for collaboration and a skill set for sound experience. And I really do think that in order to continue to teach these kind of, you know, larger concepts, we have to continue to really think about how we refocus and reimagine just the experiences that really will create joy and engagement and connection between, you know, ourselves and our students, but, you know, one-on-one and then in a group. I think it's also worthwhile to mention just creating space for conversation inside of our ensembles around these attributes. You know, what did listening feel like in a rehearsal? What does it feel like now? What did connection feel like when we were all together? What does it feel like now? And, you know, I guess just giving our students and our choirs the opportunity and the space to have the conversation about those core elements will also direct our ability to actually continue to teach those skills. So that's kind of where I am with that.
Wonderful. All right, I think we can pose that same core elements question let's have Stephen go next.
Hi, everyone. Sarah, thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with my Rhode Island peeps and a few Massachusetts peeps too, which is great. I don't want to necessarily repeat what others have said, but I do think that now is a great time for us to both, I guess, personally get clear about what it is that we do and what it is that we love about choral music. And I think to kind of add to what Amanda said, just to ask that same question to our students to see where they're at and to find that common ground. I know the other thing too that I've heard a lot in different webinars as well, and that I've you know, kind of chatted up with my students is, you know, giving them the opportunity to express and also just where they're at, and we can all have a collective you know, opportunity to be sad and to grieve the fact that we may be, you know, derailed for a little while in terms of what we normally do. But I think it's also a really good opportunity to kind of reevaluate and to again think about what are the elements that we do that really transcend. And so, you know, again, you know, obviously basic musicianship skills are never going to go away. There's still a lot of, you know, basics that we can do. And while that's probably not the most exciting thing that we all want to be doing and spending our time doing, our students still need to learn how to read music. They still need to be able to respond to listening. And, you know, I think this is also a great opportunity to do a lot of the things that we always say, oh, after we learn the notes and the rhythms and everything, and then we'll get to the listening, the comparing, the, you know, all of those elements. Let's make that be the centerpiece of what it is that we're doing now. I think we put creating on the back burner and we say, well, you know, if we get to it, we'll do some creating. I think now is the opportunity to kind of like reverse the sort of the traditional order. And I put myself right in that boat, so I'm not making judgments about anybody, because I'm right there with everybody with my choir. So I think that it's an opportunity to reflect, it's an opportunity to create, it's an opportunity to revisit those basic skills, to revisit vocal technique, and to really give our students the opportunities for individual attention that they might not have been getting either from us directly as a member of a large or even as a small ensemble. So I think for me, those are the things that are most important that I kind of want everybody, including myself, to think about moving forward. Thanks.
Wonderful. And Regina, I think we can go to you next. What are your thoughts on the core elements of what we do? Sorry. So I think Regina, we can go to you next.
That was my fault, Sarah. Now
Oh, that's okay.
Sorry about that. No, I was just saying, I think I agree with Stephen in that we can still teach music literacy, which has always been a core element for all of us. And as you said, sometimes it's not the most exciting thing to do, but it's still a major element in what we want all of our students to learn. I think part of what we teach is also things like tolerance and understanding, and that can be very much incorporated in any lesson that we could teach, whether it's distant learning or not. I know that I try, or I would like to always get the students that are not used to choral music listening to what is this that we do, and why do we love it. And listening is a huge element in what we teach, as far as getting them used to what is choral singing, what is great choral singing. So I think that's also an element that we could teach in distance learning.
Absolutely. And Doreen, we'll go to you last for this one.
Okay. So a lot's been said. And so I'm going to turn this on its head a little bit and look at the question a bit. So when we ask a question like, what are the core elements that really matter for us as music educators or choral educators, then the assumption or the underlying theme there is that there is a set of core elements. And so what I've been trying to play with is this idea of breaking down all of the traditional things that I've been forced into, sometimes out of habit, or out of, industry standard as to what I'm supposed to do. And all bets were off when we went online. And so I tend to be very left-leaning and liberal in my stance on standards and what should actually happen for any particular child. So I am kind of loving this because it allows me to have the core element for every single kid be completely different. And we're just approaching kids where they are and trying to get them to be engaged in some sort of music making. And it's all of the things that everyone has so smartly said before me, but that engagement can really look like anything for anybody. And I think that's where we win here. And I refuse to buy into there's a right and wrong way to do this or a right and wrong answer for any particular child.
I think we can definitely all agree with that statement for sure. There's no right or wrong way. Absolutely. I think we're kind of all feeling that right now. There's no answer and there's no, standard really, but we're all kind of just doing the best we can. But yes, I absolutely agree, Doreen. So we'll kind of, our next set of questions is kind of to, there's no way to know what's going to happen in the fall. So we have a set of questions that's in the case that we're virtual in the fall, in the case that we're not, and then a piece for advocacy at the end. So with thinking about these kind of core elements or lack of core elements, or just kind of boiling down to what we do or why we do what we do, that can kind of lead us into our next part of discussion. So, so this next section will be in the case that we are virtually learning in the fall. We go back to school and we're online. What are your thoughts, panelists, about starting new students in the fall with distance learning, with these kind of core elements in mind, like what's important, what are we teaching, why are we teaching it? How can we make new students to chorus successful, and in a variety of settings? So maybe we could start with Regina for this one.
There we go. So starting, I think everybody will agree, starting new students in the fall, if we are distance learning, is going to be a challenge for anyone. I can tell you that I feel very strongly that the idea of a student who is brandy new to this singing alone at home is probably not ideal. It's not going to be a good idea. So in relation to what Doreen was saying, like let's find where these students are at. If they are completely musically illiterate, then that could be a great starting point. Why not take the time? I know there are schools in Massachusetts, high schools, that if it's a new student to the program, they take the first trimester and they spend that trimester learning how to read music, learning how to sight read, listening to music. So I think that's a great way to start with those new students. I would highly, highly, highly suggest, if it at all possible, to have actual meetings with these students. I'm saying that because as a Rhode Island teacher, many of our schools are like mine in that they do not meet with the students every day. So I actually have not seen my students in 6 weeks. And I think that has been a major downfall for the program. So if you do have new students, I think meeting with them as an official class, even though the rehearsal can take on whatever shape that you want it to take, I think that's going to be a huge component. I'm trying to think of what else as far as the new students. I had another thought. I just lost it. I'm sorry. Maybe I can come back to it.
Absolutely. And moving forward through the rest of these questions, panelists, feel free to just chime in. I won't call on each of you individually. I'll just kind of start each question and then feel free to chime in with your thoughts.
If I may add to what Regina said, if it's possible to pair a more advanced student with a newer student to have kind of like a choral buddy that they can be in touch with, that they can, you know, text and message with, that they could even meet with in some other way, shape, or form in order to, again, sort of create that connection, but also so that the new student has somebody to go to and they can get their questions answered along the way. I think that could be really, really useful, and you could really deputize your older, more advanced students and give them the responsibility which they might enjoy to have kind of a mentee.
And I'll jump on that and say, when I did my dissertation work in why people continue to sing, the top 2 reasons why people sing is they obviously like to sing, but the secondary reason is that they like the social aspect of it. And there's like not enough that you can possibly do in order to like make it like the most fun, just the greatest place, the safest place for all of those kids. They're going to be in new classes with new teachers and new peers, new peer groupings. And so I know in the fall, presuming that we're going back online, that will be like the #1 thing that I'm setting up, is establishing a relationship between me and the student, making sure they know that it's a caring place and a supportive place, but that we can play together and trust each other and make music together, even though it's weird and wonky online. I know that that's so, so, so important, especially when we can't actually physically be together.
I just wanted to say, Stephen, I'm feeling that, like, I'm looking at my list of ideas next to this question, and it says buddy system. So I'm like, yes, Stephen and I are having the same thought about having, you know, upperclassmen immediately paired with an incoming freshman. Of course, I'm coming from a high school perspective, so that's kind of where my head is. But having that buddy system set up this summer, and so having those upperclassmen checking in with those kids. I also I'm doing a video project right now. that all my seniors are doing, where they're talking about their 4 years in high school, why they did choir. It's going to be full of like, you know, our choir singing from this year, and then we're sending it to the school districts. So we're sending it to all the parents, you know, all the administrators, everybody, so they see what their experience has been of 4 years singing in choir for high school. And, you know, I was thinking about for the start of school, that buddy system, you know, creating those small groups, those like sectionals where buddies are together within their rehearsal group. So that's kind of where my head is on the new student, getting them into the community.
I think the new students can also benefit from what I've been seeing a lot of the college people doing, and that's meeting with composers, like having special Zoom meetings with composers. I think that would be so inspiring to a young singer to have that opportunity. You know, they get to meet a superstar in that kind of fun way, and just something different that you can also add to things that you can do. Because I've found that the composers are very, very willing and very kind. So
kind of jump in with something a little different perspective. And that perspective is from one of, I teach at a middle school, and I don't have a multi-leveled chorus. I have 5th grade chorus, 6th grade chorus, 7th grade chorus, and 8th grade chorus. So that being said, in the fall, my 5th grade chorus usually ranges anywhere between 65 and 85 students. So let's say my numbers take a hit and I still have let's say I have 50 5th graders that are brand new to chorus online, and really the buddy system, it's not something that, you know, they would never sing in an ensemble with an 8th grader. That's never going to happen in my current setup. And then my other setup is a nonprofit where, you know, the South Shore Children's Chorus, where parents are actually paying for the experience. So how are you going to get, you know, someone paying for the experience and that kind of thing? So when I was thinking about this question about new students and how to get them kind of engaged, I kind of thought about, well, what do I do to get new students engaged anyway? And then how can I apply that to a virtual format? And I think what I came up with was simplify, 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 and then simplify again. Quick success is something that makes singers feel good. We all have those go-to pieces that we have in our back pocket of what can I do in rehearsal one that makes them feel like they did something where they made a good sound today, or even where they made a funny sound today. I make my 5th graders record a major scale on the first day and I play it back for them at the end of the year. Just doing silly things like that, and it helps them engage, help them make sound. If the issue and thought is they're going to be home alone making sound and that might be scary or judgmental, then let's go weird. Let's make funny sounds. How loud can you moo? How loud can you oink? Let's set up the space for them so that it becomes comfortable, just as we would in our classrooms. You wouldn't demand a perfect sound from them in day one of your rehearsal. So what can you do virtually to set the space, whether it be their bedroom or your classroom, to make it a comfortable space for them? That is our job. Our job is to create a comfortable space for them. And that may be more conversations about self-esteem. That may be more conversations about singing at home, helping them find a space to sing at home. But our choral classrooms are safe spaces, and we say that. And if that's our job, is to create a safe space, then in my opinion, that's what we need to do here. And we just have to find creative ways to do it. And I think short successes, wrote songs, row, row, row your boat. How many times can you sing it? Put them on mute. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they are singing. Are they singing?
Absolutely. I already, after, you know, question 2, I feel like personally I already have a wealth of ideas and knowledge from you all, so this is very exciting. Let's move on to our next question, and we're going to start with Doreen for this one. What are some ideas for meaningful, engaging activities for choral virtual learning? and what are some of the most successful assignments or activities that you've used during distance learning? So I'm starting with Doreen because, as many of you probably know, she did publish a series of activities for virtual learning. I use them with my students, choice assignments. They love them. It's been amazing. And like, quick plug for her, if you go to her website, you can find those, and they're just absolutely wonderful activities. And personally, I've been able to see my students in a totally different light through some of them, and it's just been really amazing. So we'll start with Doreen for this question.
Wow, thank you, Sarah. That's really great. Yeah, listen, so I wrote that thing for me because I needed to figure out what the heck I was going to do. And I knew I knew it was just going to be very different what was going to come out of it. And so I tried to approach it. I'll walk you through a little bit of like how I designed it so that you can take those ideas and design your own thing that works in your own context. So I started that whole transition into online learning by actually writing another little thing, which I link in the article, but it's called "Don't Just Assign Crap," because I was like, I knew people were gonna just assign crap, right? And crap to me is worksheets with no clear goal so that kids don't understand why they're doing things, right? Like, just kind of that sort of thing doesn't do it for me. So what I tried to come up with, and there's all kinds of people blowing leaves outside now. Sorry. So what I tried to come up with was lots of different entry points into music making. So some way that I could get the kid that doesn't want to sing by themselves to somehow engage in listening maybe and reflecting, whereas the kid that wants to pick up their ukulele and make a video, then that kid can do that. And so I tried to make it as open-ended as I possibly could, and then try to have as many different entry points into engagement as I possibly could. And the feedback that I've gotten from people is exactly what you said, which is it was so nice to see kids in a very individual kind of way, and that they were getting so much more deep reflection and evidence of understanding about musical concepts and music making and ensemble sharing than they thought that their kids were ever engaged in. So, you know, mind you, it's your kids that you had all the way up through March, so you've taught them whatever you've taught them. And that list catered to what I knew my kids understood. So it's like vocabulary that my kids know from me. And by vocabulary, I don't mean music vocabulary. I mean, like, that's how we interact, and that's how we talk about reflection, and we talk about listening, and we talk about comparison, and we talk about what you can get from some sort of resource. And I philosophically believe that any learning is good learning. So I just kind of use that as my guiding force with it. But there's something to it, because it's been hit 18,000 times. And to put that into perspective, there are 24,000 high schools in the United States, and it's like specific to choir director. I mean, like, it's a very small population I wrote it for. It's like really specific. I could have gone bigger, but I didn't. But that's a lot of people that found something in there, and people have written me beautiful emails and have reached out, and it's working. So the biggest response I've gotten is like, I've never tried any of these things before. And there's no right and wrong answer to those things. And I grade them on a pass fail, like, just throw me a bone, like, send me something. And the kids get good at it. And when they know you read it, or that you listen to their recording, and that you have some sort of response, like, I'm so glad you shared that with me. Like, any of that makes them come back the next time and do it again. So I've assigned it 10 times. I'm up to 24 things on my list. The kids have suggested things to put on the list. One of my favorite new additions is to teach your family a song and have your entire family sing together and make a video. And it's awesome. People are very brave. So that's, you know, that is my suggestion for how to approach this, is figure out all of the things that you want them to learn, and then you have to trust them and you have to let them do some of this stuff on their own and stop micromanaging and making everybody do the exact same assignments. I'll stop talking now.
I agree. I'm sorry, can I jump in here? Is that okay? So I jumped on the Doreen assignment bandwagon immediately, and I completely tailored it to my kids, to my students. You know, I took really only 6 of the options. I was like, here are 6 things. This is what we're gonna do. And I sent it to my colleagues, to our band, the band and orchestra directors at my school, and they took that same thing and modified it for their students. And so the students that we share, we're all kind of getting the same vibe, you know, between our classes, which was really great, actually. And we had a full choir Zoom meeting last Friday, and in the chat section, we were talking about the assignments that we've loved, the assignments that we've hated, you know, like what has worked for us, what hasn't worked for us. And so many students commented on how much they loved choice. And how much, there were some weeks their lives were completely overwhelming. And so having the choice to do something that was relaxing for them or comforting for them was a really important element to kind of surviving their week of the rest of their life, you know, home life, school life, which has all been completely upended, you know. So that element of choice is something that I'm definitely carrying with me moving forward. One thing that I keep thinking about that has worked so well for my students in particular, and it hasn't been choice-based, but structuring, so I'll just give you an example. This is one of my examples. I think I shared this with Doreen the other day. We were talking about just exposure to great singing, right? And so we explored Amazing Grace. We explored the song Amazing Grace, which is a song that we would have sung this spring. We're singing a certain version of it. And so we explored many different versions of it from great singers, solo singing, choral singing. So they had to listen. They had to, you know, compare, contrast between solo voices and then choral versions of the same piece that were very different. Then they had to read articles. We listened to President Obama sing Amazing Grace. We listened to, oh my gosh, a Mennonite choir. We listened to the A Cappella Academy. You know, I mean, just you name it, we listened to it. And then they had rehearsal tracks and we sang it. But it was a multi-stepped process of listening, comparing and analyzing, Google form reflections, talking about it in small groups, and just so many different ways to experience a singular piece of music where they had lots of different ways and opportunities to interact with it and then add their voices to it. So that's worked really well for us. They loved it. They loved that really slow approach and kind of like little mini lessons over time. So just wanted to share that thing that has worked really, really well for us. So anyway, that's it.
I'm just wondering if maybe Doreen and Amanda, if you could just, I know the Rhode Island teachers, at least some of them, would probably be interested in the various, those who haven't read Doreen's work, but would be interested in the various assignments that the students thought were like the best. Like if you can just quickly rattle off a couple examples to kind of maybe spark some inspiration in some of our teachers.
Sure. My students are obsessed with interviewing their family members. So interviewing grandparents and parents about their musical experiences in childhood, high school, and college. And I have sat and listened to these interviews just, sometimes I get an audio recording, sometimes I get a video recording, sometimes I get it completely typed out. It's so funny the way they choose to relay it, that information and present it. But hearing the surprise in my students' voices when their family members start talking about their singing experiences, they're shocked. They don't know those elements of the people that they love, and it's so interesting that they then have that thing in common. That's been the most significant one that jumps out to me. The other thing that they love doing is creating choral programs.
Yeah.
They're like, I am the teacher. They love it so much, and they go back into the music that we've sung. And what I found so interesting, it really was the seniors who wanted to do that. They wanted to create choral programs from music they'd sung in middle school, from music they'd sung in Allstate, or, whatever, but kind of the nostalgia of it for them was really strong. So those are the ones that they really responded to for me.
So I've also had the same experience with the interviews. The family interviews are amazing, right? And the kids are always like, I had no idea my parents, were in such support of music education or sang in choir or something like that. So those have been fun. The playlists, the amount of time that my children have put together a Spotify playlist and then annotated every single piece and said why it fits in this program and everything is amazing. And you know what? I know they're listening to all of that, and that's great. So I'm like on board, and they're practicing music vocabulary when they're writing about the piece. It's amazing. So that's been really good for me. I have a lot of kids that, produce pop music and will sing and that sort of thing. They've been enjoying that. They like the pitch and idea one as well, which is, you tell me how you're going to do something with music making, and they've come up with some really creative things. So that's been nice. They also like the tiny desk concerts, people that they know, they've enjoyed seeing them, unplugged a bit, and that's been nice. The other thing that I totally forgot about in talking about this is that for every single one of these assignments, there's 4 questions that the kids have to answer. And that's like the other thing that people have really commented back to me is it's not necessarily that they're doing these music activities, anything from like improvising over top of somebody else's recording or something like that. It's that they have to answer these 4 questions. And for those of you, I'll just say them real quick. They are, so number 1, what did you do? So they have to go back and explain what they did. Why did you pick this experience? How do you know if you learned anything from doing this experience, which you get amazing answers. And then the last part of it is, what could you do to extend this experience? And that for me also is super, super important, because listen, our kids, I have children that are in the public schools, and bless their teachers. They're lovely and wonderful. But my children go through their school day and are just told what to do all day long, and they do the same things over and over and over and over again, and they don't have any ownership over it. And I thought by adding this question, what can you do to extend what you're doing? It gives a kid an opportunity to maybe, have done an interview, and then to extend it, they go, I'm going to interview a friend, or I'm going to interview a teacher. I'm going to, and then they're starting to actually think like human beings and like adults. And they're starting to go, I'm in charge of my learning. I really liked doing this part of it, but now I'm going to extend it by adding this next thing. Like I improvised over something. Now I know I can improvise. So now I'm going to make a recording of myself doing something else. That's where we win. That's where they're engaged with music making. And that's where they're learning and they're directing their own learning. And that, I don't know, I just think that has to be the way we have to go with this online stuff. This micromanaging assignments is maybe not the best use of our energy. And maybe it's just better to teach them how to be organic learners and how to, that will help them when they're 24 and they're like, I want to learn a song, or I want to join a choir, and I need to, if they can figure out how to go through those steps and do it on their own, then we have more active music makers in our community.
So I just want to kind of throw this out there also. I don't know if there are any, I'm looking around, the people I know I think are mostly high school. But if there are any like tiny people teachers out there, okay, great, yay, there's a couple of them, great. So you know, I love the choice assignments. I did it. So I am admittedly this teacher. Beginning of, you know, online learning, I'm going to do all of the assignments. Look at me, I'm going to be great at all of the, and then all of a sudden, like, it just started doing that. And I was like, I can't do all of the assignments. I just can't. It's too much. And part of the reason is I have a lot of numbers. And part of the reason was I found that, you know, my 7th and 8th graders, they liked the choice assignments all right, the ones that are doing anything. My school district deemed our specialists optional. So our engagement has been really, really low. I have anywhere between 215 and 250 in my program at the middle school level. I've had an average of 35 to 45 actually completing assignments. And so it's been really difficult. I'm not given really FaceTime. We're not allowed to use Zoom anymore because of the Zoom bombers. So it's been a challenge. So in me being a human being, I started out, I was like, have these beautiful PDFs with color choice assignments and you get to do this and awesome. And then it just kind of, one week I just said, you know what, I give up. I can't do this. And instead what I did was I made a YouTube video of me doing our routine from the beginning of chorus that we do every day. And I did some solfege and I did some warm-ups and I put it on YouTube and I said, watch this and fill out a form that says, did you watch this and sing along? And I had more kids engage in that assignment than any other assignment. And every single student said it was so nice just to feel like I'm in chorus again. And I think that's something not to lose sight of. It's great to do all of these super creative options that aren't singing in chorus, but also remember that, you know, especially the younger ones, their brains are still developing and they can only have so much choice. Too much unstructure overwhelms them big time. And sometimes they need to be told what to do. My husband teaches college and we did a Zoom meeting with his collegiate students. And the biggest thing they said was, we're having so much trouble because all of our teachers said, do it when you can. And there's no due dates. And because there's no due dates, we have no structure and we're procrastinating everything. And everything is more difficult because we don't have anyone just telling us what to do. And if college students are saying that, what are the 5th graders are looking around going, my mom is home and I can sleep whenever I want and I need a snack. And, you know, they in some which way or form need to be told what to do. So when I put up a random video of me teaching them for 15 minutes, exactly how I would have taught them in the classroom, down to our routine, down to me making jokes and everything, it gave them that sense of relief. And I think that's just something, you know, to make sure you add in your mix is, you know, how can you make them feel some sense of normalcy with you and what they're used to, because they miss that and they want it. And that's what the end goal is, really. So how can we bring that to them, to just remind them that that's still going to exist someday?
I will add that I have Zoom class every week. I get to see them once a week during their scheduled time as our synchronous learning, but we do sing and sight read and we do the breathing routine and the warm up and everything. So I don't want you to think that I've just let them run amok. We
no,
are,
and not what I meant at all.
So, but you're right. That's very, very important.
I would say to our Rhode Island teachers, if it's at all possible to be part of the conversation about how, if there is distance learning, become part of the conversation about what kind of distance learning we're going to have. Because, you know, when I hear that Doreen gets to see her students at least once a week, it makes me very jealous. And distance learning without seeing the students is its own, very much its own challenge, especially trying to keep them engaged when they only say, I don't miss the music, I miss your face, or I miss seeing so-and-so. And
right, and if you guys can really advocate for that, because in the beginning when we went online in New York State, my school district was like, you absolutely cannot see children. You cannot have any sort of, synchronous learning. They took all of that away. And we just kept saying, you're killing everything. We have to absolutely see our kids. And that first Zoom call that I had with them, I was like, because you have to see them, and you have to,
and they have to see each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you can just keep saying that's really, really important, that it helps us so much to just have that interaction.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on this question, panelists? Stephen, did you want to chime in on this one? No, he's good. Okay, so we'll move on to our next question, and this is kind of a divisive one, so I apologize in advance, but we won't spend too long on it. So the next question is, what are some pros and cons of virtual choirs? How can a virtual choir be useful? So
I'll jump in since I didn't respond to the last one. I want to share that I've done what I think is the only research on actual participants in virtual choirs. My research study is a part of the Symposium for Research in Choral Singing. Currently, ACDA on the website, the conference is supposed to be at the beginning of this month in Atlanta, the second Symposium on Research in Choral Singing. And I won't go into details about the entire study, but basically I surveyed twice participants in Eric Whitaker's virtual choirs, first with a kind of a forced choice. I chose to participate in a virtual choir because, and found underlying factors of reasons for participation. And then the second sort of follow-up study was more of an open-ended survey type thing about what did you learn about your singing, what did you learn about yourself as a performer. Some of the more, I think, dare I say, important questions to choral music educators. It's not just like, okay, why did you participate, but like, what was the bottom line? So and I haven't done any virtual choirs with my own students, but I have participated in the Eric Whitaker experience a couple of times. And basically the takeaways from the research, and this was upwards of 300 people from around the world responded to the survey. Basically the takeaways were that singers are not used to hearing themselves sing individually, and so for the most part these were largely amateur singers. So I think that even though it's not directly, they're not like students that we would be working with necessarily. I think that it's generalizable enough that we, through common sense, that we kind of get the sense of this, not strictly in a research sense, but being able to sing on one's own is much different than relying on the people around you, and that's both, for good and bad. Like, Kirsten was talking about earlier, in order to be able to hear a vowel and adjust, that doesn't happen. It's also a lot of responses, that I don't have anybody to rely on in terms of my notes and rhythms and that sort of thing. While there are, a lot of negative criticisms, the opposite was also true, although to a lesser extent, that people actually said, wow, I'm actually an okay singer, or I was proud that I was able to accomplish this. And again, I'm talking about amateurs specifically. The other thing, let's see, I'm kind of pulling up my PowerPoint. The interesting thing, I think, for us to consider kind of is sort of the bigger discussion is how participation in virtual choirs allows for overcoming barriers such as geographic isolation, scheduling conflicts, personal disability, and get this one right in the kicker, audition barriers that prevent people from participating. And so this kind of open, crowdsourced format was really an opportunity for people to participate who were not able to for some of those reasons and among others. So I think that we don't want to be too hasty and say, oh, well, you know, let's just write off the virtual choir, or on the other hand, let's just jump in, because that also provides other challenges for people who maybe don't have access, or if we're requiring it, or, you know, or a student can't participate because they don't have the technology, or they don't have Wi-Fi, or they don't have access in terms of those things too. It is a little bit of, and as Sarah said so brilliantly earlier, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. But I think that if we're going to have our students do it, that we want to be really clear about what the possibilities are, both in terms of the possible benefits as well as the possible pitfalls. And not to mention, you know, just the hours and hours that either singers will put in order to produce their videos. In the first study I did, people spent as much as upwards of 10 hours or more just on the recording part to get, you know, something absolutely perfectly. I, on the other hand, when I just did my recent submission, I went through it a couple of times. I recorded it just to make sure my angles and my camera was okay. And I sent it with mistakes and, you know, like, didn't finish ends of phrases, and, you know, that's where I was like, okay, whatever, at least I'm, you know, participating. So I think we just have to be kind of real about what it is. My sort of, you know, researcher takeaways are that it can provide opportunities for, you know, access and musical enrichment, and it certainly got a whole lot of people fired up in order to connect with Eric Whitaker. But it's never going to replace in-person choral singing. So I don't think that we have to worry about that. And the first time that I presented this at the ACDA conference, you know, I just sort of jumped to that punchline because I know that so many people were concerned that, you know, in-person choirs are going to go away and this is just what we're going to do in the future. It may be what we need to do temporarily now until we eventually get back to in-person singing. But those were some of the takeaways. And if you have specific questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question, Stephen? So why didn't you do it with your choir?
Well, two reasons. One, just sort of logistically, we didn't have any kind of infrastructure for that in place. And secondly, where we were at the end of the semester, I just made the choice that I wanted to share something else with my students and give them other opportunities. All of our, you know, we basically finished through spring break and then we had about 7 weeks left. And certainly we could have done that. I'm definitely going to, you know, think about that for the fall if we continue on. Yeah.
Can I chime in? Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Should I? Okay. I'm actually doing my first virtual choir project with my students right now, which I'm actually really enjoying. I'm enjoying learning a different skill set. It feels good. You know, got to be honest, it feels really good to be able to engage with just a different technological platform and a different way of hearing them and a different way of being a musician all on my own. So that feels good to me. I'm enjoying that. I think that a virtual choir is an important and interesting way for them to hear themselves as a group. They get to hear themselves as a group. They get to see themselves as a group, which is something, as we all know, that's missing from their lives, and it's something that they value. And being able to provide that for them is something that is important to me, and it is important to my students that they engage with this as well. And this might be jumping ahead, but I think that the creation of a virtual choir or something that is, you know, them singing and sharing that with our community, with our families, and, you know, the people living in our towns. I mean, it's a really important tool for advocacy, and because people want to hear them sing, they want to see them sing, and it it nurtures a place in the community that I think is really, really important. And it's something that can be really joyful in a time when we frankly need it.
I think there's something magical about it, right? So I think that that's what the public gets from it, is like, look at all of these children singing together, right? There's great joy in that. Yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say that I've spent an enormous amount of time doing these virtual things. And I will completely agree with what Amanda's saying. It is a way to put your students in a beautiful light for the community that doesn't really understand what they're missing. And it advocates without you having to be the voice of the avocation. You know, it advocates for them. But I want to tell the people who have never tried it before, we talk about teaching the students how to sing with each other and that kind of thing. I took a very different approach because I had no money. So I used the free Soundtrap trial version. And so instead of the students doing the traditional, you know, the way in which they wear headphones and they're singing their specific thing like Eric Whitaker does it, they're actually singing and working together on the same project on Soundtrap. But in order to do that, you have to succumb to the fact that it's not going to sound the way you want it to sound. You have to just know that this is an experiment. It's a chance for them to sing together, to work together. And yes, you can finagle it, but I don't even suggest that you do that, because raw is actually kind of fun. And interesting to see who can actually match somebody else and who can actually, but they get a chance to hear each other. I wouldn't do it with brandy new students, obviously, but they do get a chance to hear each other and kind of work together, and then make a sound file out of that. And then the video part of it can just be something fun. Sometimes I tell them, you know, well, for graduation, it was, go find a place in town. We're from a small town. Go find a place in town that means something to you. Stand in front of that spot and sing your song for me. Because you're not actually using that sound anyway. You're using the sound that they created. So for those of you that are kind of, or have stayed away from it because maybe the technology is not your thing, I also agree with Amanda. It was fun and kind of helpful to me personally to learn something new in this whole process. But so I just wanted to kind of give a different light on it.
As a point of ridiculousness, I will just quickly say that I've never made one. My colleagues are making one for graduation. The music tech guy is doing it because I didn't know how to do it. And he was like, I'll just do it fast. And I was like, great. But we never did our musical this spring. And my summer project is that we're going to put together like a couple of the big numbers and then do all the scenes through Zoom and record those and splice them together and record all the solos and duets and trios. So yes, I'm going from 0 to 120 in, 30 days, but whatever, I'll reach out to all of you. But we're looking forward to like honoring, right? It's like a way, that's what we said. We want to honor the work that they put into the musical by documenting it in some sort of way. And it's not going to be beautiful or perfect. And we went to the high school and took pictures of the set so that they can put those as their Zoom backdrops when they make their recordings. And we're going to just, as a way to honor them. So we'll see. I might lose my mind, but.
I wanted to let everybody know also, this coming Saturday, the Connecticut ACDA is holding like a mini webinar spring conference. And our first session of the day is being presented by Melanie Cometa, who is the choral director at Ledyard High School. And it's called Virtual Choirs for Beginners from the Beginning. So I will be sitting right there with everybody else, but she has been really successful in her virtual choir creation and promotion, and and she's a great teacher. So I'm ready to learn from her. So I'll put the link to our website in the chat in case people would like to go and look at that. Okay.
And I'll just quick chime in and say that we'll share the link to Doreen's assignments and the Connecticut ACDA link and Stephen's link for his research. We're taking a recording right now, so we'll share that back with everyone, including those links, so that you have them all.
So I do have to jump in just a little bit about virtual choirs. I'll make it short and sweet. I'm on my third or fourth at this point. I've done a couple with different groups of people. A lot of you were in my music educator one, which was a lot of fun. But one of the things that I just want to remind you, and it's something I'm consistently reminding myself, is that advocacy and marketing are very much the same. When you advocate, you are marketing for your program. And I really found this through virtual choir. So I did a virtual choir super early with my South Shore Children's Chorus group. I think school got canceled on a Friday, and they had to do their thing by Tuesday. I had it out like the next week. And because I was talking to my husband, I was like, everybody's going to do this now. And I want to be the first one to do it. I really want to get on this. Everybody's going to start doing this now. And I'm going to be the first one to do it. So I did it to the song Beautiful City from Godspell. And, you know, when I first put it out, I have these parents emailing me, and the parents are saying, oh my God, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. I never even knew this was possible. And I remembered that not everyone in the world are choral directors. And I think sometimes that's hard for us to remember. When you're scrolling through and you're talking all the time to the same type of people, there are people that don't know that virtual choir exists, and lots of them. Like, they don't have any idea. So just because everyone is doing it that you know, doesn't mean that everyone is doing it. And I think that that's an important thing to remember, because the parent of one of your kids is going to share that, and it's going to reach somebody who maybe many people who have no idea that a virtual choir is a thing, and they're going to think that it's the most brilliant thing in the world, and that you're the most brilliant person in the world who came up with this crazy idea to have everyone record at home and sing at the same time. Like, you have that ability. And I kind of had that firsthand, because when I did that first video, I actually had 2 national television shows email me and get in contact with me, and they said, we want to interview you on, it was like the Kelly Clarkson show from NBC, and America's Got Talent. They were like, how do you do this? We want to interview you, and blah, blah, blah. And it didn't end up working out because of lots of things. But, you know, these producers from national television are looking at this going, wait, what is this virtual choir idea? I have no idea. So when that was happening, it just really reminded me, it put my choir on the map. My choir was not going to be on the map for a national television show anytime soon. We're less than 100 kids in the South Shore of Massachusetts. But what put that over the edge was somebody seeing that video that doesn't know that this idea exists. So yes, I totally agree with Amanda. It is advocacy, and advocacy is marketing. And we kind of have a shot to put this in a media where there are tons of people watching social media right now, because it's the only thing to do. They'll see it and they'll share it, more so than a performance from your in-person performance that was taken by your cable access in your neighborhood. You know, you have a shot here, and I do encourage everyone to try it. It takes a ton of time, and I keep saying that this virtual choir is my last one, and then I keep doing another one, and I will stop doing that eventually, because I agree with everyone. It's not choir. It's totally, you know, it's not the same. There's way too much time. You answer 1,000 emails that say, I can't figure out how to send you this file, and so, you know, be prepared. But if you can do it, just remember that just because every other choir director seems to be doing it right now, if we take this kind of as a team, there's a lot of people that are going to be reached by this format that might change their mind about choir, and we have a shot here. We have something that we can present to normal people.
Well, no one ever complains that everybody's choir is doing a choir concert, right? So it doesn't make any sense to like say, but everybody's doing a virtual choir, so therefore I'm not going to do it. So I agree with you.
Absolutely. So, so let's move on to our next question. I think we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but we can talk about more specific examples. So for many singers, the social aspect of choir is one of the most important elements. And so how can we as choral directors encourage and facilitate social connections between our singers at any age? So elementary through adult community choirs. And what are some specific examples that you might have of that?
I'm going to start on this one. I think, if that's okay, if everybody's cool with that. So I think when I was thinking about this, when I read the question, it first went to something I tried to do in the beginning of distance learning. We have Microsoft Teams. And so in my select group, I put like, okay, meme war, just to get them doing something. And one of my students put together this meme of like, I don't even remember what it was, but somebody with this shocked look on the face. And it was like, Mrs. Oberoi says, all right, so you all know your parts, right? And it's some person looking at the side. And that's one of my favorite things to do. But what that reminds me is, it's not about me and my relationship with the student. It's about the students' relationships with each other a lot, because I present, okay, you know your parts, right? And they have this feeling, whether or not they think I don't know, but they're in middle school, right? So they think I don't know that they haven't practiced, but they feel like they have this secret. We didn't really practice, but we're going to try and sight read, and we're going to try and fool her because blah, blah, blah. And they like me just fine, and I like them, and we have a great relationship, but they have to have that camaraderie of, she doesn't know, but we can maybe fool her. Or how many times is there a side conversation happening in your chorus rehearsal where someone's afraid to ask you a question, but they'll ask the kid next to them that's singing the right note, wait, where are we? And that's what builds the camaraderie. So I think my biggest thing in just remembering and trying to engage socially is remembering that I have to take a significant step out of it somehow, because they need to connect with each other. And I think that's easier the older they are and more challenging the younger they are. Older students can text. I've got students who are not allowed to use social media. Lots of students that are not allowed to use social media. Lots of students that before this, I don't know if parents have changed, that are not allowed to text or have a cell phone. So I think that utilizing your school's, whatever they use, whether it be Google Classroom or Teams or whatever you use, to facilitate student to student relationships somehow. Even through a game, even through just letting them share something personal, or share with your neighbor how you thought rehearsal went today, but you don't find out, I think is an important step to remember.
Any other thoughts from our other panelists about encouraging?
Well, I was just going to say, one of the projects was the students could, choose what they wanted to do, what they wanted to perform, what style song they wanted to sing. And I shared some of them because they can't see each other. So I took a few that I knew would get positive feedback and shared it on our Google Classroom and allowed the students to talk to each other about it. And it was just very uplifting because the students were telling their friend, I had nothing to do with it, they were telling their friend, oh my gosh, I didn't know you could sing like that, or and that little bit of feedback, that little bit of ego boost really went a long way and kept them a little bit more connected than they would normally be in this situation.
Other thoughts? Any other panelists want to chime in on this one? It is a tricky subject.
I'll do a plug for Flipgrid. I don't know if you all are familiar with Flipgrid, but Flipgrid is great. It can be a trick, but luckily my sixth grade math curriculum uses it. So by sixth grade, all of my students know, but it's something where they can basically have a comment thread like Facebook, but with videos. And I think it's really interesting whether you do it in singing. I do certain ones where they just send it in and I'm the only one that can see it, and I do that setting so they can sing to me. But also it's great for things like reflection. If you have a question, like reflect on this piece of music, you posted a video of you, and they can actually answer the question and talk to each other, comment on what each other says, and see the thread of videos. And it's not in real time, but they can access it whenever they want, and it can become a student to student relationship, and it's very easy to use. My 5th and 6th graders can figure it out, and they can't figure out anything. So I really check out Flipgrid. I've found it to be a really, really great resource.
Wonderful. I will also say that I know personally I've been doing this, and my wife Ashley's been doing it too with our older students, is having like a lunch bunch video call, and she has another one, it's like coffee club or something, and just having like social time with the kids, and sometimes leaving your computer open and going upstairs and saying, oh, I have to go do a quick thing, and just letting them talk and kind of socialize with each other, like Kirsten mentioned, not without the adult presence there, I think is pretty important. We'll move on to our next question. So our next question is, what are some strategies for an effective virtual learning rehearsal? And what do you think are the benefits to holding virtual rehearsals? So maybe we can start with Stephen for this one.
Sorry, did you say me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm happy to. I have been, I'm associated with our local children's choir, and I'm a board member and work with them. So we've actually been continuing to have online rehearsals, and they have, they don't obviously necessarily look like typical rehearsals. And I've also experienced this with my own students too. It works very well in terms of a sort of one-way communication from teacher to students with everybody on mute. I think that it's pretty, kind of like what we're doing here. For those of you who maybe have not used it, I just want to say that. So it's very, very effective for, teacher conductor modeling, for students to just echo on their own, for even rehearsing sort of repertoire in the traditional kind of way. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that that's definitely a viable way. I think if you're using Zoom or other platforms, we at the University at UMASS where I teach have had Zoom for, I don't know, 3-4 years now, and so we are, my colleagues and I in music education, we're very familiar with using Zoom, and we do our meetings on Zoom sometimes when we're lazy or when the weather is bad. So it's a really useful platform to have something if you're able to do that with your students. Zoom in particular, and I'm sure there are other ways of doing this with other platforms, allow for breakout rooms, so you can have all of the soprano ones or all the sopranos or whatever go and sort of meet together in a room and have kind of like another maybe deputized student leader, and then you're able to float back and forth through the classrooms. Obviously with older students and obviously my college students, they were able to do that, and then I could go from classroom to class, or breakout room to breakout room and answer questions. And then obviously, you have to scale it appropriately to your level, the students that you work with, their level of independence and ability to be, handle the technology well. I understand all that. The ACDA NATS webinar, I don't know if anybody attended that yesterday, it was really, really fantastic. There were a lot of great ideas, everything from just simple improvisatory style, I'm going to make something up and call and response, and then somebody responds, or we're going to sing a piece of music. I'm going to take the first phrase, Sarah's going to take the second phrase, Amanda's going to take the third phrase, and then we actually can hear the piece in real time, so that we're doing that There was another suggestion about improvising just sort of aleatorically. We're going to start with our one chord. You can sing do, mi, and so. Everybody unmute themselves and just sort of capitalize on the fact that, you know, we have the lag, we have the different mic volume levels and all that. And then whatever you hear is just that, you know, magical moment. And then, you know, maybe add another chord to it, you know, if you're tonic and you're dominant, and then we move to that. So there are definitely ways that we could at least approximate that. And I think the other thing too is, again, depending on the age and kind of abilities of the students with whom you work, that I don't always have to be the teacher. You know, I can have students deputized to lead a warm-up. I know probably many of you do that anyway. And you know, what we decided to do with the children's choir is just to kind of do like a little bit of a round robin. So, you know, like I do physical warm-up, somebody else does, you know, vocalizing, somebody else does patterns, somebody else does rhythm, so that the students get a chance to participate, and then also there's sort of shared leadership among the adults in the room who are there. So I think that's probably good for now. Other people can jump in.
I think one of the things that I really think about in, you know, having an ensemble rehearsal is if there was ever a time for unison singing, this is it. What melodies do you want them to know? What simple pentatonic melodies do you want them to know? How you know, how can you talk about line? How can each person sing the same thing differently? And I think that that's one thing that I'm really thinking about. And the other thing that I'm thinking about that I kind of mentioned earlier is just setting the space. And I think that that's really important for some of us who teach the, you know, you think about that kid in your chorus that their parent might not totally love the fact that they're in chorus, or they have to have a quiet space. And how do we be inclusive to those people? And I think it's a really great way to start having those conversations to eventually lead into home practice. How do you practice? How to practice? How do you set up a space for you to practice? And I think that that's something that shouldn't be a missed opportunity to teach here. How do you have that conversation with your parent that says, I need to find a space, like it is important to me to find this space? And how can you give them verbiage? How can you help them and aid them in that? Or how can you give them words to say, I appreciate that you are listening. However, I need the privacy of no judgment right now. And I need, you know, I don't need your opinion, basically. Thanks, Mom. I don't want to sound like Lady Gaga. I want to sound like my choir director is telling me. And so I think it's important that we really help them just create that space. That's something that is really important to me in my teaching anyway, is setting that space. And I think that's a super big challenge at home and shouldn't be forgotten about. One great idea is if everyone is home and the Wi-Fi reaches to their car, or they can do it from that, they can always sit in their car and sing. That, you know, if they have a car. That's just an idea that I've used a lot for students that are nervous to sing in their homes. But I think this is a great way for us as music educators to really help them find ways to advocate for themselves to create music inside of their homes.
I think it's important that if you do have rehearsals, now I'm coming from someone that has no experience with this, so take it for what it's worth, but I think it would be important for that student that doesn't have any experience, that's very, very new to this, that is very self-conscious about who's in their house, that you be understanding of that in that rehearsal, in the sense that if they're just sitting there in the rehearsal but not doing anything, there's a reason for that, and be okay with that. Which I think is kind of hard for us because we want to control the situation, but if they're part of hearing what's going on, they're there. So they've made a step in the right direction. And then gradually, you know, hopefully you can get to what Kirsten was saying and get them to find their own space and be comfortable singing alone. But I know that I have in my Come One and All choir a ton of students who the thought of hearing themselves sing alone is petrifying, and they are so afraid. I mean, I had a parent email me that said, well, my daughter's in the bathroom singing and my son is in his room with the door locked with music blasting and he's recording, or something like that. So they do have to find their own space.
Can I take this a little different direction? And just, I don't know, as a public service announcement, I find online rehearsal to be soul crushing, and the worst thing. And I cry after I smile and wave and kiss my kids goodbye. And so I just want to put out there that if that's how you feel, that you are not alone, and that I literally grieve that every single time that happens. And the only thing getting me through this is saying this is temporary and it can't be like this forever. But man, it is rough. I just wanted to say that.
Which is why I think that we all need to keep at the forefront of everything we do, that this is temporary, needs to be temporary, and we need to advocate for it to be temporary.
Definitely. I think we can move on to our next question, and we have a little bit about advocacy in just a little bit. So in the case that we are returning to school in person in the fall, if school resumes, how do you envision, panelists, that we can facilitate singing within the social distancing guidelines? Of course, no one has the answer, right? There is no the answer, but we can certainly think about what ways might work for us. So what do you think, panelists? How can we make it happen? Maybe we can start with Amanda. I haven't heard from her in a little bit.
Doreen's raising her hand. She wants to go first, I see. I have no idea. I have no idea about how to sing within social distancing guidelines. I mean, I'm just trying to get my head around it. I'm trying to imagine what that might look like. And I mean, with my current class setup, I can't imagine it. There's no way to manage that within the physical space that is available to me. Like my classroom doesn't even have a window. There's no ventilation of any kind, you know? I mean, it's just, I don't even know how to approach this specific topic. And I'm thinking only selfishly, you know, I mean, of my own situation. I know what I've heard. You know, I've heard other people talking about choir in the gymnasium, 20 kids at a time, you know, standing 20 feet apart. Is that safe? Is that doable? Is that something we should even explore? I mean, I think it's completely dependent upon your physical space, the amount of singers. I mean, what does your personal situation look like? And I think it also is really dependent on the research that is forthcoming, that is coming our way, you know, over the next couple of months, in terms of like, what's really safe? How do we keep our singers healthy and safe, and how are we responsible for them? Because that's the ultimate that's our ultimate responsibility, is keeping them and their families safe. And that's where I am with that. I don't know.
So when I think through this in like the best of all possible worlds here, I could go to the auditorium and spread my kids out and use a body mic for me, and they could wear masks, and I could make sure the aerosol studies say that when you sing, it's going to project this far, and we can have the air conditioning on. I have no idea, right? But when I play it out, I think like that maybe could work. I don't know. There's like, when I drive around, there are bands of 10, 15 teenagers at a time walking around together, unmasked, and like, so I'm a little like, rah! Like they're all exposed to each other and taking great risks. Anyway, not that that should be our place to cause them more risk, but I think that where that's going to shake out is going to be an interesting political thing. But when I had a thought, now it's gone. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer. But the auditorium with the body mic was my like best case scenario. I had another thought, but it's gone. That'll come back. Sorry.
Can I go, Sarah?
I know what it was. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
The only thing I was going to say is I just feel very strongly that we don't get pigeonholed into this place that says that choral singing is the only dangerous thing that happens and therefore choirs shouldn't happen in schools. Because that teacher who's projecting her voice in the front of the classroom is using the same amount of breath and energy that I am when I'm singing. And the coach and all those kids screaming and yelling on the recess field are doing the exact same thing that our singers are doing. So I refuse to be taken down single-handedly and somehow pushed aside in my school district. I just want to put that out there. That was what I want to say.
Amen. That's a great point.
Well, I agree. And I was thinking that, you know, thinking completely outside the box, yes, totally could use the auditorium, all that kind of stuff. But I was inspired by some of the churches in the South that are having their services outside so that their choir can sing outside. And if that's even at all possible at the beginning of the year, if you have any space, just like the athletes, if they're going to be outside, well, why can't we hold our class outside? But even on a funnier note, you know, you go to Stop and Shop or all these places and they have the plexiglass, you know, blocking the people. Well, hey, let's get a bunch of them made that kids hold on to their own little, you know, their own little shield, and we can have our entire rehearsal and you know, their spit is not going to go very far. I don't know. We definitely have to think outside the box though on this, because they are not going to schedule a class with 65 kids in a room sitting next to each other on a set of risers. And if you don't have the relationship with your guidance department that is, you know, hey, we need to group this group of kids together, this group. I mean, that's like an ideal situation. The majority of the people, they're going to say, hey, you can't do this unless you give them a way that you can. So thinking outside the box, we're all artists, we're creative people. We're just going to have to, you know, maybe get a little silly about it.
I'm going to jump in here because Doreen, I couldn't agree with you more with what you said. And I think a lot of us are feeling that and are in that boat. And I think one of the dangers, and I find this, you know, I like to think up all of the possible options that could possibly happen. My poor South Shore Children's Chorus staff, I actually handed them a sheet of 10 ways we could possibly change our programming next year. And that was before any of this happened. It was just 10 completely new ways I thought of to do things. But then I realized that that can sometimes be dangerous. And what I would just kind of suggest is don't make up your own guidelines. Look at what your state is saying is safe and the CDC recommendations, and I wouldn't go further than that personally. If the CDC says we can have school, but you can only have 15 kids in a room and they're 6 feet apart, then be 6 feet in a room, or 6 feet apart in a room. Don't let your school use information that may be true, may not be true. You can find that eggs are healthy. You can find that eggs are not. You can find all of this information on the internet, and I would just stick to the guidelines. And then my other thought here is I always go back to marketing in my head. I go back to what are we doing well and what are we doing poorly? And I think we're doing a lot poorly, personally. We're sharing a lot of information that is early. And I thought of this especially when I looked at the guidelines that Massachusetts just put out for reopening. And youth sports is in phase 1. youth sports in a limited fashion is actually listed in phase 1 of opening. So what are they doing in youth sports? What's the difference in what youth sports is doing to market their safety that we're not doing? And I'm not saying put people at risk. That's not what I'm saying here. But what I'm saying is, what research has been done? What are the actual guidelines? And don't set yourself back. Don't get in your own way.
Any other thoughts from our panelists on this question?
I just thought I would throw in that I think it was one of the first ACDA NATS panels. There have been a couple, and to be honest, I've totally lost track of when they are and who was on them or whatever. But the one that I think this was kind of the first one, and all of this is on the ACDA page under the teaching in COVID-19 or what have you, is the heading. But there was a researcher who's doing research on the virus and treatment, or vaccine, and then there was another doctor who is doing like surgeries and whatnot. Again, totally don't remember any of the details. The huge takeaway was people were asking, is there any way that she could imagine how choir rehearsals could happen? And this was they just talked about the really great way that we as singers can, spread the virus, presumably. And that she basically flat out said there is no way that she could possibly conceive of any kind of traditional choir rehearsal. And she had shared what her process is for when she does surgery, and the layers and layers of precautions and the uniform and the cooling and heating in her, in her suit, and the screen that she has, and it's, specifically treated. It's just like, it goes on and on and on. And she went into great deal to explain to people the precautions that are taken in the medical profession to minimize the risk. And obviously, she's doing surgery on people, so it's a little bit different. We're not sticking our, nose in somebody else's mouth or throat or whatever. But nonetheless, she made such a clear point. I don't want to, I do acknowledge that we're creative people and can come up with, workarounds, but she was very adamant that there's no mask, there's no covering, there's no nothing that we all could wear in our own classrooms in order to prevent supposedly transmission of this from what is understood right now in the medical community. So I'll be anxious to see the results of that instrumental study about the aerosol. I would be interested in further research that's coming out to see. I know that ACDA is supporting, has made contribution to another study that's being done. I think we really, if we're going to act in the best interest of everybody, ourselves and our students, I think we really need to defer to that, and we really need to know what the facts are or what is known in the moment and make the best decision possible. Because certainly we don't want to put ourselves or anybody else at risk. So anyway, sorry to be like the wet blanket on this, but I take it very, very seriously, being married to somebody who's in the high risk category. Like, I have to be very, very cautious about my own health and how that will affect him. So, I mean, yeah. So anyway, thanks.
This kind of leads us into our last bit for today. So the big question, I think, on everybody's minds is, how can we advocate for our school and community programs when we're in such fear that they're going to be cut, when we're in fear of the virus, when we're at this time, what can we do now to help ourselves and not shoot ourselves in the foot? What do you think that we can do to advocate for our programs? We'll start with Doreen.
So one of the things that I asked all of my singers to do was to be a historian and write down what it is that they love about being in choir. And again, it was everything from, like, I just love to sing with my friends and all those sorts of things. But there is so much evidence for it being important for their well-being. And I'm not prescribing to the idea that we sing and then the primary reason that we sing is for our mental well-being. It happens to be, though, a side consequence, which is a nice thing. And I think that that's a really good advocacy tool for boards of education and administrators to know that kids put down in, like, I now have 130 documents that say, this is the reason that I come to high school. This is the reason that I feel safe. This is the, this class is what makes me feel like I belong. This is the part of my day that is not stressful and awful like all of the rest of my day, right? I literally have like this pretty gross receipt now, but I'm going to compile every little last answer, take their names off of it, and say, this is why my class exists, and this is what it does for these kids, and it's really important. So I'm going to use that as my advocacy tool. I mean, they know we make beautiful sounds and all of that, but I don't, sometimes we have to kind of take them a further step. So.
I think also too, this is a time for us as educators to be as flexible as possible without sacrificing. So I think that there's a fine line between being adamant about, I absolutely need X, Y, and Z, otherwise this is not going to, happen. And then, and I could imagine administrators' response would be, well, I'm sorry, then we're not going to be able to make that happen, So I think, but on the other hand, I think that, can you teach when there's, a full moon in the month of October when, da 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 da, and I think that's also, sort of to the far extreme. So I think communication is really important. I think support of families, booster organizations, working together with like arts, art and drama and dance and whatever you have at your school. We don't need to be a one-person island. We don't need to be martyrs. We don't need to do that. We have lots of people around us that can help. We have lots of people that are in our corners. We have lots of support, probably in places that we are not always reminded. And so I think that just reaching out and started having those conversations first with students and then extend that to parents, obviously administrators, boards of education members. I think that would be really, really important to just have those conversations, even if they're informal, even if they're off the record. I know that when I taught in public school, most of my interaction with members of Board of Education were all off the record, and they were, outside of school hours, and they were either at a private meeting or they were on the telephone, and it was ended with, and this call never happened, right? So, I mean, I think that people are willing, they want to know, and they want to have, their finger on the pulse. So I think it's sort of a multi-pronged approach. And then when possible, if we have something like our fabulous virtual choir, we can certainly offer that up. But that isn't obviously the goal in mind. We can be flexible and getting back to our earlier, the first question, that we're serving students' needs. Period. Just like the math teacher, just like the English teacher, just like the social studies teacher, just like the physical education teacher. We're serving the needs of students. We're creating eventually fully developed human beings. Thanks.
Yeah, I want to add a couple of thoughts here. What I'm hearing everyone else say is that advocacy really is kind of multi-layered. Advocacy is not something that's kind of far away and like the job of your MEA, right? Or your state level or national level ACDA. It happens every day in everything that we do. Our relationship with our students and their relationship to each other advocates for what they experience and for what we do and create with them. And I would just encourage everyone, yes, to absolutely reach out and connect with your other organizations in your town, in your community. If there isn't another agency, like go to another town, reach out to your local to your state ACDA and find someone, to connect with, to collaborate with. And also with the other teachers in your building. you know, I've already reached out to one of our social studies teachers because we dreamed up this huge thing about, you know, women's, you know, right to vote, and this thing that we were going to do this huge presentation and concert and whole interdisciplinary thing this fall. Well, we're still going to do it, but it's going to look really, really different. You know, reach out. Like, I have a thing going with our physical education, you know, teachers about how to create like a meditation and mindfulness class based in choral music. I know it might sound crazy, but just get ready, everybody. Okay, and I'll share that with everybody as well. But my point is, reach out and collaborate, because that is advocacy. It is building those layers of advocacy within the community. So the community at large will advocate for you ultimately, because that's the goal. And we cannot be afraid to have conversations, to have real conversations, to have hard conversations. I so agree with Stephen. Those conversations, they happen at the weirdest times, right? And just to create and forge relationships with everyone in your community at many different layers. Something that, I mean, like, it's going down in Connecticut right now in terms of just arts representation. I don't know what's been happening in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. I'm just not aware of kind of what's been happening at the state level in terms of policy and reopening. But it's time to reach out and have connections to people who are actually making policy. So whoever your leaders are within your ACDAs, and I'm looking at them right now, you know, if you're here in this session and you have an idea or you have a situation going on, reach out to your leadership. Don't be afraid to say something. Start a conversation. If you're dealing with an issue in your school district or wherever you might be, whatever your professional situation might be, reach out to your ACDA, because they are going to help you. They're going to be there for you, and do not be afraid. Like, there is no, you know, wrong question. There just isn't at this point. You know, we really need to depend on each other. And the other thing that I just want to add is that part of advocacy, and it's interesting, I find people are really either for this or against this, but at least within my town, I'm a regional school, so we are 5 towns, have a social media presence right now. Right now, for your department, for your school, for your singers, have some sort of social media presence that you can just immediately blast out to the entire community, because you need to be present in, again, many layers of community. So anyway, I will stop talking now. Thank you.
So when I hear all this talk about advocacy, I think it's awesome and it's great. But for me, I'm looking at all these questions and I'm saying, you know, we've been answering these for years. We've been advocating for our programs forever. And this is just the Super Bowl. This is the one where we have to win it. We have to do it. We have to all come together, and it just kind of reminds me, there's this scene in Seussical. I love Seussical. It was the first musical I ever did. It's awesome. But you know, JoJo starts talking, and then all of a sudden everyone starts chanting, "We are here, we are here, we are here." And I think that's actually really powerful, that they were only heard not when this one little voice, and then all of a sudden this one little voice goes, "Yop!" right? And that yop is what's heard, but it's the masses that all come together that really make that voice heard. And I think right now that's what we all have to do together. And we've all been doing it, right? We've all been saying, we're here when we need to. Oh, this year it's good for me. I'm just going to be quiet. I'm just going to sit still because it's good for me. So I'm going to hang here. But right now we all have to chant, we are here. And I think that that's an important thing to remember, that, you know, connect with other people in your disciplines. and who are in different school systems, but I mean, I'm looking at friends and colleagues that I teach near. And I think it's important that we all connect, and we're kind of thinking about what can we do to advocate together in a way, because right now it's all happening, and it's all happening at the same time, and we have an opportunity to send a big wave, and we can do that. And just, you know, to throw more ideas, here's an idea that I'm doing this week. This week, my students have an assignment to send an email to any teacher that's not me with a name of a song that reminds them of that teacher and why. And that just might be something where a teacher that may get annoyed in the future that now there's 7 chorus classes instead of 1 because they have to all be broken up, that remembers that in this moment they got an encouraging, a cute email from a student because you assigned it. Another thing that I'm doing is I'm using my virtual choir skills for good, not evil. So I actually am teaming up with my principal. We're doing a pre-recorded virtual promotion ceremony for our 8th graders, and I'm helping her record with my external mic. I'm bringing it and sanitizing it. So she has an external mic with one of the sound filters, and she doesn't have that. And that's something I can offer for her. So just be thinking about, you know, what little things that you can do that have nothing to do with advocacy, because that's also advocacy. Make sure that you're known and that you yell yop.
So I think we can open it up to, we have just about 10 minutes left, open it up to any questions that anyone might have for our panelists. And so if you just want to unmute yourself and go ahead, that would be fine. No questions at all?
I have a question.
Okay, wonderful.
My question's for Stephen about your research, and it caught my attention when you said that singers wanted to connect with Eric Whitacre. And even though I haven't been able to read your research, and I know sometimes it's frustrating when you get a question and that's not what you were looking for, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Did you find that they felt when it was over that they did connect to Eric Whitacre, and did they have that sense of community with the other singers?
That is a great question. I'm just going to pull up my PowerPoint, not necessarily to show, but just to refresh my own memory. So one of the things one of the things that I started to look for in the first study was basically just meanings of participation. In other words, why did people participate in the first place? And so there were a bunch of statements that they agreed or disagreed with. And then what I did was to look further to see if there were any underlying factors or commonalities with all of their responses. And there actually were. And let me just pull up my slide to refresh my memory. There were 6 factors, the first which was Eric Whitacre. So we had questions like, I chose to participate in a virtual choir too, and then that was sort of the stem, and then every rest of the sentence was different. So like, to work with a composer who is the conductor, to work with a conductor who inspires me, they're just sort of these generic kind of answers. And what I was able to discover with it, there were actually 6 factors. So Whitacre was the first one, musical achievement, and these titles that I'm telling you now are what I labeled them. So under musical achievement were things like to work on my singing voice, to work on my musicianship skills, and those sorts of things. Then factor 3 was inspirational, like I chose to participate in a virtual choir in order to inspire others. I choose to participate in a virtual choir to make a difference in the world. So these were all inspirational factors. Then the last 3 factors had to do with self, like I chose to participate because I could do it on my own time, or I had an opportunity that I wouldn't normally have. Factor number 5 was recognition. People felt that they were doing it for like bragging rights, or that they were going to be able to boast about the fact that they participated in this. And factor number 6 was communal. So like connecting with others, participating with friends or family, those kinds of things went into that particular factor. So I wasn't looking specifically for, again, these particular things. They emerged out of all of the kind of reasons for participation to suggest larger underlying reasons for participation. So one of the big conclusions from that first study was that, and of course this is not surprising, is that much like in-person choir participation, like Doreen mentioned, and I did cite you in the eventual chapter that's coming out in the book. Yes, of course, yes. And it was actually right after I saw your presentation at ACDA, and I was like, yes, this is awesome. I'm going right to your literature review. It was fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So virtual choir participation, just like in-person choir participation, is multidimensional. There is not one reason why people participate in choir. And in fact, in some of the research that I found, people don't necessarily participate in choirs in order to be connected. There's research that suggests that you can participate in a choir completely solely as a solitary endeavor, where your purpose is not to connect with people, which sort of blew my mind. But then of course I saw this in the virtual choir results also, that you don't necessarily, like, people don't necessarily have to connect. In fact, some people may want to participate in a virtual choir so they don't have to interact with other people. So again, there's just many perspectives that we need to keep in mind. It's much more complicated than in a very simple, like, here's the answer. Audrey, did I answer your questions, or do you have a follow-up for that? Or if there are any other questions, I don't want to take up all the time with this.
Yeah, no, I think you answered it really well. I think you answered it really well. I wondered if it sounds like, so what you did look at was the reason they participated, but you didn't look at whether those were outcomes of their participation. I just wonder if their expectations were met in terms of community, in terms of connecting in particular. And thank you for the information about the multifaceted part of it. I think that's really important to keep in mind. And Doreen, I can't wait to find your lit review.
Are there any other questions for our panelists before we wrap up?
I have a quick one. We talked a lot about ideas for virtual stuff and then what to do when we're back in the classroom singing, but what about the in-between kind of scenario where we're back in the classroom but aren't singing or might not be able to?
So I've actually been asked to come up with a curriculum that can be fluid between those two things, depending on what might happen. So I'm in the process of doing a couple of things. Number one, smart music is a great resource if it's something that your district can afford for your students. It's a little gimpy in the fact that, like, it has to be Google Chrome and you can't necessarily do all the songs you want, but for my purposes, it creates a structure. It can create a structure of something that is expected. So let's say we're working on a piece that's in smart music, which there are not many in choral. If there's anyone from smart music that watches this later, more choral music, thank you. We basically, there's a listen sing method that's on there that I'm going to be using with my 5th and 6th graders that's echo song. And I can look at the activities in smart music and do them in person, and then on a week off or 2 weeks off or whatever might happen, they could then go home and record what we had practiced in smart music. Or I could, if we can't sing in the classroom, I could record a video of me singing those and they could practice that at home and then record it in smart music. So using technology is a way to kind of do curriculum. Same thing with Flipgrid. You can use that, but finding a way to partner with technology. I'm changing my piano curriculum for 8th graders to a theory and songwriting course using flat.io. If you don't know that resource, it's absolutely fabulous, and it's $1.50 per student. So it's super, super affordable. And teaching them to compose. Right now I'm teaching a 7th grade music enrichment course where they're all composing, and they love it. They love it, they love it, they love it. They can hear it back in real time. They can collaborate on scores. That's what I like about flat versus note flight. So, you know, or if you can sing them, maybe they have to write the exercise on flat, and finding ways to kind of meld together in person and outside using technology, I think is really smart. And I think it's just something to think ahead about, and actually might not be a bad idea for the future. You know, in the way that we're going technologically, it would be remiss to say we haven't found some things that work better. There are some things that work better. And so finding a way to couple that, I think is really important and really smart to think ahead about.
Can I just add to what Kirsten said, is that a lot of these technological platforms in this age are starting to collaborate and work together. So flat.io now works with Soundtrap, and you can export directly from your composition in flat.io to Soundtrap, and then just drag and drop loops and all of that. So you take your 4-bar melody, that's a really simple composition activity for your lower level kids, 1-bar melody, their beat, their rhythm, whatever, and you export that, and then you can use that and copy it and do all of your composition stuff through Soundtrap. So a lot of those platforms are now talking to each other.
Awesome. So I think we're going to wrap up here, but if anyone has any further questions, you can certainly email them to me, and I'll be happy to connect you with any of our panelists. We'll be sharing the recording of this as well as the list of resources with all of you and with the Rhode Island membership. And just a quick plug for Rhode Island teachers, we are having our, we can't have wine and rep night, of course, but we're having wine and conversation Zoom call. I think it's Friday, June 13th, but it's advertised on our social media, so we hope you'll join us for that. And then we'll also be making a document based on what we have come up with in this session, and we'll be sharing that with you all as well. So thank you all for attending. Thank you, panelists, so much for your insight and inspiration, and good luck to everyone with the end of your school year. Thank you, everyone.